History often speaks of the Vikings as fearless explorers, great sailors, and brutal warriors. But behind the glory, behind the legends of longships and dragon-headed sails, lies a story far darker than most people dare to imagine. And nowhere is this darkness more haunting than in Ireland, especially in Dublin, where historical documents and archaeological discoveries reveal what truly happened to the wives of defeated warriors. What the Vikings did to these women was often worse than death itself. In the late 8th century, the Vikings arrived in Ireland. They came first to raid monasteries, smashing open churches, burning villages, and seizing treasures. But soon, they set their sights on something even more valuable: people. Dublin, which had been a small settlement on the River Liffey, became one of the largest Viking slave markets in all of Europe. The city grew, not just because of trade in silver or goods, but because of human trafficking, and the women of defeated Irish warriors were among the most desired prizes. When the Vikings clashed with Irish warriors, the aftermath of battle was almost always the same. The men who survived were often executed or sold into slavery, but the women, especially wives of chieftains, kings, or brave fighters, were singled out for a different fate. To the Vikings, these women were properties that breathe. They were treated like cattle, claimed as possessions, divided among warriors, and sometimes fought over like land or treasure. Imagine the horror of standing among the ashes of your village, your husband lying dead, and realizing that you had just become the living prize of the men who killed him. The sagas and some Irish annals record disputes among Vikings not only over gold or weapons, but over women themselves. A captured wife might be claimed by a powerful warlord, while his men demanded a share. Sometimes fights broke out among the victors, and women were literally dragged from one man to another as spoils of war. In Dublin, these women were paraded through the slave markets. Archaeological evidence near Wood Quay shows shackles and chains, suggesting how captives were displayed before being sold. A wife of a defeated Irish warrior could end up in the bed of a Viking raider one night and on a slave ship bound for Scandinavia the next. For many warriors, taking a defeated man's wife was not just an act of lust, but a way of showing dominance. It was psychological warfare. To strip a man of his wife and family, to turn his household into property. This was a humiliation designed to crush entire clans. Even darker stories emerge from the accounts of ritual practices. In some Norse funerals, especially for powerful men, women were forced to die alongside their owners. The Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan famously recorded such a scene in the 10th century. A female slave of a dead Viking chieftain was burned alive on his funeral pyre after being raped by multiple men in a grim ritual of honor. While Ibn Fadlan's account happened along the Volga River, historians believe similar rituals may have occurred elsewhere, including among Vikings in Dublin. The Vikings justified much of this brutality with their religion. Odin, the god of war and wisdom, demanded blood, sacrifice, and submission. Women captured in raids could be seen as offerings to the gods, tokens of victory, or tools for rituals. The blending of violence, sex, and spirituality created a world where human life, especially the lives of captive women, had little value beyond what it could bring in wealth, pleasure, or power. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Dublin had become infamous. Foreign visitors wrote of its slave markets, where Irish women and children were sold in staggering numbers. The Annals of Ulster, an Irish chronicle, mention repeated Viking raids where hundreds of women were captured and shipped across the sea. Some were sent to Scandinavia. Others went as far as the Middle East, traded by Viking merchants along rivers and trade routes that stretched thousands of miles. What was life like for those women who remained in Viking households? Some became concubines, forced into bearing children who would serve as proof of conquest. Others worked as servants, their identities erased, their families lost forever, and yet a few managed to rise in status. History records instances where Irish women became wives of Viking leaders, weaving themselves into Norse society. But this was rare and usually came after years of servitude. For most, life was a cycle of fear, abuse, and survival. Evidence of Irish DNA in Iceland shows that many Viking settlers took Irish women with them, not as partners, but as captives. Up to 60% of the maternal DNA in Iceland today can be traced back to Irish women. Viking sagas sometimes bragged about capturing women as if it was a mark of honor. One saga describes a chieftain boasting not of gold or silver, but of the women he had taken from his enemies. Even centuries later, Irish monks wrote bitterly about the foreigners who stole women and children, describing it as a wound that never healed. For the Irish, this was more than a physical loss. It was an attack on the very fabric of society. To take a man's wife, to destroy the family unit, was to shatter clans and kingdoms. It was not just about defeating an army on the battlefield. It was about erasing a people's pride and future. When we think of Vikings today, it is easy to picture horned helmets, longships, and tales of adventure. But behind those images lies a shadow far darker. In Dublin, Ireland, the truth of what happened to women after the battles is written in broken bones, in ancient chronicles, and in the memories passed down through generations. To become property that breathes, to be traded like livestock, to face rituals of fire and violation, this was the true horror behind the Viking legend. For countless women in Ireland and beyond, they were nightmares made flesh. And their legacy is not only carved into history books, it lives on in the bloodlines, the ruins, and the painful silence of the past.